Why is it important to know that there is no free will in relationship to God? First of all, there can never be two free will entities in the universe at the same time unless they both are of the exact virtue and attribute. And what I mean by that is virtue of holiness, love, grace, compassion, majesty, etc., or attribute, power, knowledge. All of these things have to be equal in virtue and in attribute for there to be two free will entities in the universe at the same time. Because if there is an opposing virtue, one can be stronger than another in each individual. And this includes angels and all men. And that's why there can't be two gods. If there is opposing virtue and attribute, someone is not free of the gods depending on which one is stronger. Now, I'm not proposing that there are many gods, but that's why it doesn't work. There is one supreme God, and his virtues and attributes can never be suspended to billions and billions of people in order for them to have a free will to do as they please by choice. Why? Because in so doing, God would have to suspend his very substance of spirit, sort of hold his breath to the will of man. Let me explain more correctly from the scriptures. God spoke to Moses and said, but he said, "You cannot see my face, for no man will see me and live." The essence of God in spirit is God declaring himself in virtue. God is spirit, except in the person of Jesus Christ declaring himself to us. God is spirit. He is spirit form. And in that spirit, God is self-existing life. He is self-existing life by the virtue of who he is. Let me explain. The essence of God in spirit is God declaring himself in virtue. He is, in essence, the virtue. His compassion was in his spirit, along with grace and mercy. Love, goodness, holiness, and majesty are all one with God's substance in spirit. The essence of God, of who God is, can never be thought of as different from his virtues. There was never love, compassion, and goodness, and then God took on a spirit. And there never was a spirit without love, goodness, power, majesty, splendor, truth, grace. Up there was all these things in God, in the substance of who he is, by spirit. So God is spirit, and in his spirit are his virtues. They are one together. You cannot say God was spirit and then later he became virtue. God had power, God had knowledge. All of the time that he existed as spirit, the two are one. That is his essence, his virtue, and his attributes. Now listen real close, and you might be able to get this and resolve this in your own mind. If God was to relent and say, man can have a free will and do whatever they want by their own power and knowledge to make a choice, they would be entities outside of God's substance form, his spirit, and his virtues, acting independently, opposing his freedom in his spirit and in his virtues. So God would then become not free, because he would be subject to the entity that can act out on its own merit to do whatever it is that it's going to do. Now, some say, well, God knows the future, but I'm going by most of the audience and their theses that they are acting out of a free will, independent of God at all times, and God has not ordained their life, but they have a free will to make a choice. Well, this is impossible. As I have just stated, God's substance form of self-existing life would cease to be, because he is his virtue and his substance at the same time. And if he held back power and love and wisdom, and he wasn't the full force of all his virtues at all times, then he's holding back the breath of his own life. And that's what he would have to do if there's billions of people in the world who are acting in a free will system. So the people who declare free will would have to find someone who is of equal virtue to themselves and of equal power. For example, if someone with a free will says, I want to steal your bike, and they steal it, and they say, well, the virtue of my free will says that stealing is not bad. If you need something, take it. And the person who stole the bike was in attribute power stronger than the person who had the free will to leave his bike there, locked up. And he said stealing is wrong. Well, the virtue of the strong would conquer the virtue of the weak. So in order to have a free will spirit, they both would have to agree and be of the same substance form of virtue and attribute in order to act independently. And since each is acting not in accordance with the other, someone is not free. Now, that means that God has ordained all things, and he has never suspended anything to anyone at any time in all of his theology. And I know there's verses on willingness and will, and if you will, etc., etc. But all of these things are culminated for man to admit his powerlessness and not his freedom. And that when he has willingness and he has a will, it is feeble and cannot do the measure that it desires to do, either in sin or to restrain sin or to live a life according to its imagination, because it cannot. It doesn't have the virtue and the power to resist the quote-unquote box that they are created in to live in, to admit powerlessness and live unto God in submission. Now that doesn't mean I don't have a subjective relationship to God and that I don't fear and I don't pray. I can believe that God has ordained all things and believe that God has ordained it for my good. But since I don't know what that is, I can pray in fear and in suspense of what that is, knowing his ordained will is what will occur. But I can still pray to know that will. In fact, most theologians who preach on prayer and preach it well say those who are praying the closest are praying God's will. They're not really twisting God's arm to get a result, but they are stretching themselves through to the powerlessness of getting rid of their own imagination to know what the spirit mind is in every given situation, so that they could say that they have answered prayer because they sought after God and God revealed himself to them in prayer. And that's why many people fail to get their prayers answered, because they are looking to twist God's arm or to do a will rather than seek him in prayer for what that will may be in any given situation. And that's why we are ordered to pray in all prayer and supplication at all times, giving thanks, because the deepest and the most sincere prayer is to ask God for acceptance. I know this is a little bit too much for